Welcome to the Student Learning Objective Training Module, Depth of Knowledge. You may know it by another term. It is commonly called DOK. I'm Jennifer Gates, School Instructional Specialist. Thanks for joining us in preparation for your role in assessment on the SLO Development team. This and other modules are available at your convenience on the SLO Blackboard shell. We recommend when you finish this, Part 1, you watch and reflect on Part 2, DOK. This module offers the following learning objectives: to provide SLO Assessment Academy members with strong understanding of Webb's depth of knowledge, to identify the distinguishing characteristics of each of the 4 DOK levels, to review sample standards and assessment items based on each of the 4 DOK levels, and to prepare SLO Assessment Academy members with the foundation to identify, write, and support DOK-based assessments. Being selected to participate in the SLO Assessment Academy is a tremendous opportunity. You represent the best educators in the district and have the responsibility of creating assessments that best reflect the standards, learning objectives, and instruction used in the course. Raising your hand to participate means you're investing not only in your own professional development and growth, but in the highest level of instructional quality possible for our teachers and students. On behalf of the district, we thank you for the time, energy, and expertise you'll bring to this important experience. Your role and responsibilities include becoming familiar with the use, concepts, and application of DOK to write SLOs. Your content supervisor will already bring expertise and knowledge, and together all members of the SLO development team during the assessment academies will contribute to the accurate identification of DOK level for each SLO assessment item. Now let's remind ourselves, what is an SLO, or Student Learning Objective? It's a measurement of 2 points in time that shows student growth. It's used by all teachers in Georgia of non-tested subjects. It helps to tell the story of how effective classroom instruction informs teacher growth, as well as professional goals related to instruction. In Cobb County, we believe student growth as a means of telling the classroom story is effectively allowing us as educators to provide instruction that works. We ask, what instructional needs do our students have, and how can we continue to improve how they're met? Most importantly, how am I as an educator improving my understanding of the best teaching practices and what's needed to continue to inspire, engage, and deepen my students' knowledge? SLOs do all of that and more. This module and Part 2 prepare you to write, develop, and refine SLOs for use in Cobb County schools and their classrooms. At any time, remember to press pause to reflect on the content and material, and to return to this presentation, simply hit play. Here in Cobb, we're developing SLOs in the 3-phase process. Development using teacher teams of outstanding educators with assessment expertise is Phase 1. The second stage is review of the items developed using additional collaborative teams of teachers, and then implementation of the assessment items as part of the evaluation system. Review is a cyclical process, and after implementation, items will continue to be reviewed across the course of the academic year. This ensures not only appropriate depth of knowledge and rigor in the assessments, but also the opportunity to continually refine and improve our assessments with an eye to formative growth and professional development. A reminder that our SLO process in Cobb County includes thorough and wide-ranging involvement of teachers at all levels of development in the pre-writing, writing, review, and application stage. SLOs are scheduled to be implemented in the 2014-15 school year starting in January. They're one component of the teacher assessment on performance standards and help inform student growth and academic achievement. Now, just who's behind DOK? This man, Dr. Norman Lott Webb. DOK, or Depth of Knowledge, is his creation based on many years of research and assessment expertise and experience teaching math. He's based at the University of Wisconsin Center for Education Research and the National Institute for Science Education. He wanted a way to connect the cognitive aspects or levels of thinking required by state standards and the assessments that measure them. At first, the DOK model was intended to be used with standardized state tests, but like all great ideas, its application to classroom activities, including the analysis of standards, curriculum, and activities, makes it invaluable. Dr. Webb's work later influenced Karen Hess, who took Webb's model and added content-specific descriptors. We'll look at those later in Module 2. Using DOK to develop SLOs does several things. It helps to focus on the ways in which students interact with the content standards, as well as the assessments. It helps determine student growth and understanding by looking at the standard itself, not by looking at student work. DOK should always be reflected in the standard or assessment item or task. That level of DOK should be well understood by the educator, and the expectations should be clear for the student. As you know through our SLO development process, SLOs are guided by DOK levels that help ensure rigor and relevance, as well as engagement and cognitive challenge. Let's talk about the expectations for student performance. Dr. Webb breaks down DOK into 3 basic components: knowledge that students will acquire, use, and then use to extend their thinking. Levels of DOK are associated with the various components. Acquisition of knowledge can be DOK 1 and occasionally 2. Use of knowledge is consistently 2, and strategic and extended thinking, or higher order thinking, occurs generally at levels 3 and 4. SLOs in Cobb will be written at level 1 occasionally, consistently at level 2 and 3, and level 4 DOK, as you know by now, is generally associated with tasks and assessments that extend over time beyond brief periods and involve performance. So what is DOK, and why do I need to understand it in order to write SLOs? Well, DOK levels are driving the thinking behind the SLOs, which means it's important to understand the level of cognition associated with the SLO given, as well as its specific questions. For each question developed on an SLO, the development team will accurately determine the DOK level, and they'll get to this work by collaborating on the design of the questions and assessment and making sure there is reliability and validity to each assessment.
The Common Core Learning Standards expect students to perform more cognitively demanding tasks. But how do you know that the tasks students complete meet these rigorous standards? Webb's depth of knowledge, or DOK, is one way to measure the cognitive demands of tasks. By using 4 DOK levels that build in complexity, cognitive rigor looks at the DOK as well as the type of thinking required for students to interact with and respond to content. DOK 1 elicits recall and reproduction. DOK 2 focuses on skills, concepts, and basic reasoning. DOK 3 expects strategic thinking and complex reasoning. And DOK 4 requires extended thinking. Depth of knowledge, which is integrated with the revised Bloom's taxonomy in the Hess Cognitive Rigor Matrix, is an important tool as schools begin to increase the rigor of curriculum maps, assessments, and instructional practices to align to the Common Core. Rigorous instructional materials should include a mixture of tasks from across DOK levels. In order to better understand increasing cognitive complexity, let's look at the succession of a social studies task from a DOK 1 to a DOK 4 using the same text. The text we'll be using is the Gettysburg Address.
7 years ago.
The Common Core Learning Standards for Literacy place the Gettysburg Address as a 9th to 10th grade text. So we will focus on aligning tasks to the requirements for this grade band. The following tasks align to the Common Core Reading Informational Text Standards 1, 2, and 6 for these grades. A sample DOK Level 1 task for this text is, what date is Lincoln referring to as 7 years ago? Although this task has a couple of steps, it is DOK 1 because it asks students to identify a footnote explaining that score equals 20, and then do a simple math word problem to calculate that the reference date is 1776. A DOK 2 question that builds off the previous task is, what is the connection between the date 7 years ago and the argument Lincoln is trying to make? This question is a DOK 2 because it asks students to identify the central idea and explain a relationship. The task asks students to determine the significance of the date mentioned. Then, they must explain how this relates to Lincoln's main argument for preserving a nation formed on principles of freedom and equality. As we move on to DOK Level 3 and 4 tasks, we notice that instead of one right answer, there are opportunities for multiple correct answers, with justification and an explanation of reasoning. A DOK Level 3 task for the Gettysburg Address might say, Lincoln's address lays out a thesis and argument in support of equality. Analyze his line of reasoning and the evidence he uses to advance his point of view. This is a DOK 3 task because it asks students to analyze the use of rhetoric as Lincoln relates the basis of equality during the founding of the United States to the fight to end slavery in the battles of the Civil War. A DOK Level 4 task requires extended thinking and in-depth analysis, most often seen in longer-term projects. For example, with this text, a student might be asked to draw from additional related sources, to write a research paper that discusses the role war plays in nation building. This task would require students to refine and deepen their understanding of nation, as presented in Lincoln's speech, and examine how conflict can shape and reshape national borders. It would also require students to analyze and synthesize information from various sources. This task succession focuses on social studies examples, but the basic principles apply across disciplines.
This video comes to us courtesy of Engage New York and their SLO development process. Well, here's another look at our DOK levels. Now remember, we are building at DOK level 1 when needed, DOK level 2 consistently and whenever possible level 3, and as assessment writers we're making the multiple choice SLOs and making sure they are cognitively challenging as much as possible to match the learning standard and outcomes of the course. Looking at Bloom's, you can see how creating or synthesizing aligns with extended thinking. With Bloom's, we look often at how the verb is used, and with DOK, we look at the context in which the verb is used. Now, DOK is not about difficulty. Difficulty is a reference to the complexity of an assessment item and can relate to the number of students that can correctly answer a question. However, DOK is about the intended outcome. That means the intended student learning outcome is the focus of the depth of understanding, or DOK. DOK is a reference to the complexity of mental processing or cognitive complexity that must occur to answer a question, perform a task, or at level 4, generate a product. So why do we care so much about DOK for SLOs? Well, in Cobb, we're using the DOK levels the same way that they're being used at the state level. We're using them as a basis for foundational use as the development of student learning objectives begins and is consistently managed. With every SLO developed in Cobb, the DOK level of the standard and the item will be reviewed, discussed, and ultimately established by the development team. Here you can see the DOE's Table of Specifications, or TOS. It's one of the forms completed by teams during the content weeks, and this version has the DOK analyzed by item. You can see it in the columns there. However, when we look at this one, this TOS is analyzed by standard, and note the differences. On this form, you can see 2 columns. In the item cognitive demand column, you can see the DOK level for each item question listed by standard. This SLO may have several standards it uses, and for each question, more than one standard may be used. Cobb recommends for each SLO developed between 5 and 10 standards be used, if possible. This is consistent with the state model. And as you look closer at the column, you can see standard, how each question, for examples 1, 4, 6, and 10, has an affiliated DOK level. And for the second standard, it's DOK level 2 for questions 2, 5, 7, and 9. For the same standard, again indicated at the far left, DOK level 3 is used for 8, 6, and 12. At any point, remember you can pause any of the presentations to reflect on your learning, and when you're ready to move on, click the play button. Make sure your sound is still on. This wraps up part 1 of our DOK module, SLO Training for Assessment Development, Depth of Knowledge. Thank you for joining us. Please watch part 2 in succession and reflect on your learning in order to best prepare you for our Cobb County SLO Development Academies.